My name is Clara Simmons, and I am 82 years old. I sit in my rocking chair every morning, sipping tea and watching the sunrise over the hills of Virginia. To the outside world, I'm just an old woman with a quiet smile and silver curls. But I carry a secret that has lived in the deepest part of my bones for over 6 decades. A secret so heavy it silenced my joy. A secret that began the night before my wedding. The night I lost everything. It was June 12, 1961. I was 19 years old and I was in love. Truly in love. My fiancé, Thomas, was the kindest man I had ever known. He'd walk 5 miles to fetch me flowers or stand in the rain just to see me smile. We were supposed to be married at the little Baptist church on Oak Hill the next morning. My dress, ivory satin with lace I hand-stitched, was already hanging on the bedroom door, catching moonlight through the window. My veil fluttered gently with the breeze. Everything was perfect, until my father walked in. I heard the creak of the hallway floorboards first. I thought it was Mama coming to check on me. I even smiled. But it wasn't Mama. It was Daddy. And he didn't come to wish me well. I don't remember everything. Trauma steals the neat details. But I remember the sound of the door clicking shut behind him. I remember his breath smelling of whiskey. I remember how he stared at me, not as a father, but as something else. Something I still can't find the words for. He told me Thomas wasn't good enough. He said no man would ever love me more than he did. And then he did something so vile, so violating, I stopped being Clara that night. My screams were trapped in my throat like stones. My fingers clawed the sheets. My soul left my body. And when the morning came, I was broken. But I still put on the dress. I still walked down the aisle. What choice did I have? What nobody knew was, I was pregnant, with my father's child. And that was just the beginning. Before I take you back to how it all started, let me ask you something. Have you ever had to smile while your soul was bleeding? Have you ever had to carry a truth so cruel that it twisted your spine just to keep standing? I want you to walk with me now. Back to the very beginning. To the dusty roads of my childhood. To the first time I ever learned that silence can scream. Because before the night of my wedding, before that unholy evening that changed my life forever, I was just a little girl with big dreams and a quiet voice. And the man who destroyed me was the same man who once tucked me into bed and kissed my forehead. But how did it all go so wrong? And why did no one ever stop him? Please stay with me. I need to tell this. I need you to hear it. 'Cause this is not just a story about pain. It's about survival. It's about the woman I became, despite everything, and how, decades later, I finally took my power back. But first we must go back to when I was just 5 years old. That's when I first noticed how long my father's eyes lingered, and how my mother always looked away. If this story moved you, if you believe the truth must be heard no matter how long it takes, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps stories like mine reach others who need to know they're not alone. The first time I felt something was wrong, I was 5 years old. It was a hot summer in Virginia, and the cornfields buzzed with life. I was outside chasing fireflies, barefoot, with my little cotton dress brushing my knees. Mama had called me in for supper, but Daddy said I could stay out a bit longer. Just me and him. He smiled down at me, his cigarette hanging from the corner of his lips, and said, "You're growing into a pretty little lady, Clara." I didn't understand then why that made my stomach twist. But I never forgot it. That evening, I sat at the dinner table, knees swinging under the chair, watching how Mama avoided his eyes. Daddy always spoke loud and clear, his voice filling the room like a storm. But Mama, she barely whispered. She never corrected him, never argued. And when he placed his hand on my shoulder and left it there too long, she just turned away and refilled his glass. From that moment on, I learned what silence meant in our home. Silence was safety. Silence was survival. And silence became a second language I spoke for years. Back then, our house looked normal to anyone who passed by. 2-story, white-paneled with blue shutters. Swing on the porch. Flowers blooming out front. Family Bible on the table. But the walls had secrets. Secrets that clung to the curtains and creaked through the floorboards. My father wasn't always a monster. That's what makes it harder to explain. He was handsome, charismatic, the kind of man who could charm the church ladies and make the deacon laugh. He worked hard on the railroad and brought home money every Friday. People respected him. But no one saw what I saw. No one saw how his eyes changed when Mama left the room. No one saw how he watched me from the hallway when I was brushing my hair. And no one believed me when I tried to tell the truth. Years later, I remember one night when I was about 8, I woke up to find him standing in my doorway. Just standing there staring. My heart pounded so loud I thought it would wake the whole house. He didn't come in. He didn't say a word. He just watched me. I lay there stiff as stone until he walked away. That night I wet the bed. I didn't even feel ashamed. Just scared. Terrified of the man who kissed me on the cheek every morning and called me his little sunshine. I wanted to tell Mama. I tried once. She was folding laundry, humming a hymn, and I said, "Mama, I think Daddy's different." She stopped, the hymn falling silent on her lips. Her hands trembled. But all she said was, "Go outside, Clara. Don't talk like that." And that was that. I kept quiet for years. Until I met Thomas. He was the first light I had ever known. We met at church when I was 16. He was new in town, helping his uncle with the local hardware store. He had a gentle way about him. Never raised his voice, always looked you in the eye. With Thomas I laughed again. Real laughter. The kind that made your chest open wide and breathe without fear. He would write me letters even though we lived 2 blocks apart. And he always signed them, "Forever yours." When he asked to court me, my father said no. But Thomas didn't give up. He kept showing up. Helping Mama carry groceries. Fixing the fence. Bringing me flowers. And finally Daddy gave in. But not because he wanted me happy. I later learned. He was planning something. Something dark. We were engaged a year later. I thought I had escaped. I thought happiness was finally mine. But something in Daddy shifted as the wedding drew closer. He got colder. Started drinking more. Sometimes he'd slam his fists on the table during dinner. Other times he'd whisper things under his breath. Things I pretended I didn't hear. And then came the eve of my wedding. Mama had gone to stay at her sister's house to prepare the bridal brunch. I was alone in that house with him. And that's when he came into my room. That's when he ruined me. I still remember the way my wedding dress looked the next morning. Stained with my tears. Wrinkled from my trembling hands. But I wore it anyway. Because shame has a way of convincing you it's your fault. And I believed it was. The wedding went on. I walked down the aisle with my father holding my arm. No one knew I was crying behind that veil. No one knew what he whispered to me before letting go of my hand at the altar. He said, "Smile, Clara. Mine. Forever." And I did smile. 'Cause I had no choice. But when I looked into Thomas's eyes that day, I knew I had made a terrible mistake. Because I was carrying a secret. A secret in my womb. A secret I'd spend the rest of my life protecting. Or hiding. But it wouldn't stay hidden for long. If you believe some truths need to be told even when they hurt, please like, comment and subscribe. The next chapter will take you deeper into Clara's silent war. And her unspoken strength. I didn't know I was pregnant right away. All I knew was that something inside me had died. And something else had taken its place. After the wedding, Thomas and I moved into a small cottage just down the hill from my parents' house. It had 1 bedroom, a creaky porch, and a kitchen that always smelled like wood smoke and cinnamon. Thomas, it was heaven. To me it was prison. Because every time I closed my eyes, I saw Daddy's face. I tried to be a good wife. I cooked, cleaned. I folded his shirts just the way he liked. I let him hold me even when my skin recoiled at the touch. But there were nights I'd cry into the pillow so he wouldn't hear. And mornings I'd stare at the mirror, wondering who the girl in the reflection was. Then one day the sickness started. First I thought it was nerves. Then I blamed the heat. But deep down I already knew. I was late. And not just a little late. I remember sitting on the bathroom floor, hugging my knees, rocking back and forth. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to know the truth. But when the nausea wouldn't stop and my stomach began to swell, I couldn't deny it anymore. I was carrying my father's child. A child created out of violence. A child I hadn't asked for. A child I didn't know how to love. Thomas noticed my silence. He noticed my detachment. And one evening, as the sun dipped below the pines, he asked, "Are you all right, Clara?" Delight. I told him I was just tired. That I was adjusting to married life. That everything was fine. But he didn't believe me. And it wouldn't be long before he found out the truth. One afternoon while he was at work, I went to Mama's house. I had to talk to her. I had to say it out loud to someone, anyone. My heart was screaming for help. Mama was in the kitchen peeling apples. When she looked up and saw me crying, she reached for a towel. "Mama," I whispered, voice shaking. "I think I'm pregnant." She froze. The apple dropped to the floor. I could barely get the next words out. "It's Daddy's." Her lips parted but no sound came. Just tears. Silent, steady tears. And then, to my horror, she walked out. She didn't say a word. Didn't touch me. Didn't even look back. I stood in that kitchen, alone with the scent of cinnamon and peeling apples, realizing that my mother was never going to save me. I left the house numb. Days passed. Then weeks. I stopped going to church. I avoided friends. I walked around with a secret that poisoned everything it touched. Thomas kept trying. He brought me tea at night. He rubbed my back when I couldn't sleep. He even built a little cradle with his bare hands, thinking we'd started our family sooner than expected. Each nail he hammered into that would broke something in me. Because I knew it wasn't his child. And I couldn't keep the lie forever. Then came the evening that changed everything. We were sitting by the fire, the baby starting to show. Thomas reached over, gently placed a hand on my belly and whispered, "I can't wait to meet our baby." Broke. I started sobbing uncontrollably. Loud, ugly sobs that shook my bones. Thomas pulled me close, confused, scared, but I couldn't stop. The words came out like a dam had burst. "It's not yours, Thomas." He froze. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. When I finally told him what happened, told him about that night before the wedding, about my father, he looked like he couldn't breathe. He stood up, walked to the door, stared out into the darkness. And then he left. He didn't say a word. Just disappeared into the night. I sat by the fire alone, rocking back and forth, belly full of a child I never asked for. Heart shattered into pieces too small to find. And for the first time I truly believed I would never be whole again. But I was wrong. 'Cause what happened next changed everything. If you're still with Clara, if her story has touched something deep in your soul, please like, comment and subscribe. The next chapter will reveal where Thomas went, and what he did when he returned. This journey is far from over. The next morning I woke up to an empty bed. The pillow beside me was still indented, but cold. No note. No footsteps. No voice calling my name. Thomas was gone. The quiet inside that cottage screamed louder than any storm. I waited the whole day. I sat by the window, hands resting on my swollen belly, eyes fixed on the road, praying he would walk back through that door and hold me. I kept replaying his face when I told him. His silence. The way his shoulders sank under the weight of what I had confessed. But by sundown I realized. He wasn't coming back. At least not that day. That night I made myself a plate of food and didn't touch it. I stared at the cradle he built. My eyes burned with tears, but I didn't cry. I had no more tears left in me. Just emptiness. And then 2 days later I heard a knock at the door. I nearly collapsed rushing to it. But it wasn't Thomas. It was Sheriff Grayson. He was a kind old man with a crooked back and kind eyes who'd known my father since boyhood. He tipped his hat and said, "Clara, we need to talk." My heart stopped. I thought something had happened to Thomas. But what he said next chilled me to the bone. "Your husband came down to the station. he said gently. He was angry. Real angry. Said something awful had happened. Said he needed help. I clutched the doorframe to keep myself from falling. Where is he now? Asked. He went to your daddy's house, the sheriff said. My breath hitched. Alone. The sheriff nodded slowly. He told me not to come until he was done. My knees gave out. That same evening I heard gunshots. 3 of them. They came from up the hill, from my parents' house. Then silence. The sheriff raced out the door. And I was left there trembling, holding my belly, whispering, God, no. Oh, please, no. Hours passed before I got the call. Thomas was in jail. He had broken into my father's house, found him drunk in the living room, and confronted him. The neighbors said they heard yelling, Thomas screaming, my father laughing. Then they heard the shots. But Daddy didn't die. Thomas had fired into the floor. He didn't want to kill him, just scare him. Just break him. But even that was enough for the law to take him away. And Daddy, he pressed charges. Imagine that. My abuser pressed charges against the man who tried to protect me. When I visited Thomas in that holding cell, he wouldn't look at me at first. He sat on the bench, hands bruised, lips cracked. Then finally he said, I couldn't sit still knowing he walked free while you cried yourself to sleep. Tears rolled down my cheeks as I pressed my hand to the glass. I'm sorry, I whispered. I should have told you sooner. I should have. Clara, he interrupted softly, finally turning to face me. I'm not angry at you. I'm angry that no one protected you. Not your mama. Not your church. Not your town. And I swear if I have to spend the rest of my life behind bars, at least I'll know that man knows what fear tastes like. The pain in his voice was heavier than anything I'd ever carried. I left that jailhouse with a stomach tight from sorrow, mind racing with thoughts I couldn't sort. When I got home, Mama was waiting on the porch. I hadn't seen her in weeks. Not since I told her the truth. But now she looked older, frailer, like she'd been crying too. She didn't speak as I walked past her. But when I reached the door, she said quietly, He used to hurt me too, you know. I stopped cold. What? She stepped closer. Her hands shook as she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small locket. She opened it. Inside was a picture of her. Barely 18. Bruises along her jaw barely hidden by makeup. I stayed because I was scared, she said, voice cracking. And when he turned on you, froze. I didn't know how to stop him. I failed you, Clara. I wanted to scream. To hit her. To tell her her silence cost me everything. But all I did was cry. Because for the first time I saw my mother not as a coward, but as another victim of the same monster. Still, her guilt didn't change what had happened. It didn't take away the child growing inside me, or the man I loved sitting behind bars. And then, a week later, something happened that would twist the knife even deeper. I got a letter in the mail. No return address. Just my name written in shaky, angry handwriting. Inside was a single sentence. You'll pay for betraying your own blood. I knew it was from Daddy. But I didn't know just how far he'd go. If this story has stirred your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Like, comment, and subscribe so others can follow Clara's journey. The next chapter will take you into the fire that nearly consumed everything, and the decision Clara made that would change her child's life forever. I held that letter in my trembling hands for a long time. You'll pay for betraying your own blood. That was all it said. No name. No explanation. No apology. Just hate. Pure, cold, poisonous hate. It didn't surprise me. My father had never known how to love. Only how to possess, control, and destroy. But what shook me was how boldly he sent that threat. Like he wasn't even afraid anymore. Not of the law. Not of the shame. Not of God. I sat at the kitchen table, the clock ticking above my head, my tea untouched. Then something inside me snapped. Not fear this time. Resolve. I couldn't protect myself back then. But I would protect this child. I would protect what was left of my soul. And if no one else was going to stand up to him, then I had to do it myself. I walked up the hill that evening, the gravel crunching beneath my feet, my belly heavy, my breath short. My mother's house was silent. She hadn't spoken to him since Thomas was arrested. But I knew he'd be there, hiding like a spider in his web. When I knocked on the door, it creaked open on its own. He was in the living room, sipping whiskey, legs up on the table like he didn't have a care in the world. "Well, look who finally came home," he said with a sneer. I didn't flinch. I walked in, stood right in front of him and said, "This is the last time you'll ever speak to me." He raised an eyebrow, mocking. "Is that so? I'm filing for a restraining order," I continued. "And if you ever come near me or this baby, I'll make sure the whole town hears what you did to me." He chuckled and leaned back in the chair. "Nobody'll believe you, Clara. You're just a scared little girl with a bastard in her belly. You think your church friends want to hear that?" I stood my ground. "Maybe they won't," I said. "But I don't care anymore. I'm not hiding." And with that I turned and walked out the door. That night, I sat in bed and wrote a letter to Thomas in jail. I told him everything. The sheriff, the threat, what I planned to do next. And I made a promise. "I will not let our child grow up afraid," I wrote. "Even if the blood that made them is cursed, I will raise them with love. I will break this chain." I mailed that letter the next morning. And then, 3 days later, I collapsed in the kitchen. Pain shot through my stomach like fire. I was only 7 months along. The ambulance came fast. The doctors rushed me into delivery. And just like that, my child was born early. Tiny, fragile, wrapped in tubes and wires. I named him Elijah. He was 3 pounds, couldn't breathe on his own, and had a crooked little cry that broke me every time. The nurses said he might not make it. But I sat by that incubator every day, reading to him, humming lullabies, pressing my hand gently against the glass. I told him stories about the ocean, about sunflowers, about how love can grow in even the darkest places. And then, one morning, he opened his eyes. It was the first time I felt hope again. But that hope didn't last long. Because one night, as I left the hospital to go home and rest, I saw a figure waiting by the steps. It was Daddy. He looked like a ghost, gaunt, unshaven, angry. "You gave birth to my sin," he spat. "That baby ain't right. You should have ended it." I stepped back, heart pounding, hands shaking. But I didn't run. "Stay away from me," I said. "You're gonna regret this, Clara," he growled. "You think you've won. You think this is over." Then he disappeared into the dark. I reported the incident immediately. The hospital placed guards outside Elijah's room. And for the first time, I truly feared for my child's life. Not because he was born early, but because his grandfather wanted him gone. And I still had no idea how far he would go. If you believe love can rise from ruin, if you believe no one should have to fight alone, please like, comment, and subscribe. In the next chapter, Clara will face her greatest fear, when her father vanishes, and the baby suddenly disappears from the hospital. The morning I walked into the NICU and found Elijah's incubator empty, I thought my heart had stopped beating. For a split second I thought maybe they moved him. Maybe they were cleaning something. Maybe it was routine. But the nurse's face said otherwise. She rushed toward me, panic in her eyes. "Clara, where were you? We've been paging you." I just went home for a few hours to rest," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "Where's my son?" The nurse's lips trembled. "We don't know. He's gone." The hallway started spinning. My knees buckled. Someone caught me before I hit the floor. "Gone. My baby. Elijah. Whoa." I screamed so loud the whole floor went silent. I screamed until my throat was raw, until security came running, until my grief bled into the walls like a fire alarm that wouldn't stop ringing. How could this happen? There were guards. There were nurses. There were protocols. The hospital launched a full lockdown within minutes. They checked every hallway, every exit, every camera. But the footage had gaps. Somehow, someone had disabled the security feed for the NICU hallway during the night. And there were no witnesses. Only a nurse who remembered seeing a tall man in a janitor's uniform walk out just before the shift change. She thought he was new, but there was no janitor scheduled for that time. The moment she described him, dark boots, hunched walk, a limp in his left leg, I knew. It was him. It was my father. He had taken Elijah. Collapsed again. Only this time I didn't cry. Something inside me hardened. Something deeper than fear. Something colder than grief. I stood up. I want to speak to the sheriff. Now. Sheriff Grayson arrived an hour later, jaw clenched, coat still dusted with sleep. He listened carefully, silently, his face growing darker with each word I said. "I'll find him, Clara," he promised. "We'll put out an alert across the state. I swear it." But days passed. Then a week. Nothing. No sightings. No calls. No baby. Just silence. The town began to whisper. Some said the baby was never real. That I made the whole story up to cover a scandal. Others said maybe it was God's punishment for my sins. Even the church I grew up in refused to mention Elijah's name. They didn't want to interfere with private family matters. But I didn't care about their gossip. All I cared about was Elijah. Then, one rainy morning, an envelope was left at my doorstep. No stamp. No handwriting. Just a single sheet of paper inside. It was a photo. Blurry, grainy, but clear enough to see. My baby. Wrapped in a tattered blanket. Crying in the back seat of a rusted pickup truck. And beside him, the unmistakable silhouette of my father. He was still alive. And Elijah was too. But where were they? Why hadn't he killed him? And then I understood. He wasn't trying to get rid of Elijah. He was trying to raise him. Like he raised me. That thought made my blood run cold. I couldn't let history repeat itself. I couldn't let that monster shape my child the way he twisted me. I needed help. And there was only one person I trusted to fight beside me. Amos. I went to the jail the next day. He looked thinner. Paler. But when he saw me, he stood immediately. "Elijah's alive," I said. "But he's gone. My father took him." Thomas leaned in, hands gripping the glass. "You sure?" I nodded and showed him the photo. His jaw clenched. His eyes filled with rage. But he didn't waste time with anger. He whispered, "You need to find my brother. He's a private investigator now. He owes me everything. Show him that photo. He'll know what to do." I wrote the address down and left immediately. That night, I knocked on a stranger's door with a heart full of desperation and a photo in my hand. A man with the same sharp jawline as Thomas opened the door. He looked at me for a moment, then at the photo. His face darkened. "I'll help you," he said. And just like that we were at war. A war to find Elijah. A war to rescue a baby from the same nightmare I'd barely survived. But we had no idea. My father had already left the state. If you're still here, walking this painful road with Clara, please like, comment, and subscribe. In the next chapter, the manhunt begins. And Clara finds something unexpected in her father's past that shakes everything she thought she knew. We started in Virginia, but it didn't take long to realize he was gone. Far gone. Thomas's brother, David, had contacts in neighboring states, old friends from his army days and private investigator network. Within 48 hours, he tracked down a fuel purchase made with a forged ID in West Virginia, an old truck matching the one in the photo. The timestamp was only 3 days old. My father was still on the move, and he was heading west. David and I packed up and followed the trail. Motel receipts, gas stations, abandoned cabins. Each lead felt like chasing smoke, but I couldn't give up. Not when I still had that photo burned into my brain. My son's terrified little face in the backseat of a truck that reeked of danger. At every stop I left flyers. I showed the photo to clerks, diners, old women sweeping porches. "Have you seen this baby?" Some shrugged. Some said no. Some looked away. Maybe they had seen him, but fear kept them silent. And then, in a tiny town in Kentucky, a teenage girl at a gas station said, "Yeah, I saw them." He asked if there was a church nearby. Real intense guy. Had a limp. My heart pounded. Did he have the baby? Yeah, she said. He was screaming the whole time. The man told me to mind my business. She scribbled the name of the church on a napkin. St. Martha's, up near the mountains. We drove through the night. And when we got there, I felt the air change. It was quiet. Too quiet. The church stood alone near the woods, half collapsed from neglect. Inside, a cross still hung over the altar. But the pews were rotting. The windows were cracked. And in the corner, on a dusty mattress behind a curtain, found a toy rattle. Elijah's rattle. I fell to my knees, clutching it like a lifeline. He was here, I whispered. My baby was here. But where had they gone? David searched the back room and found a worn envelope under a Bible. Inside was a letter. My father's handwriting, jagged and angry. They're trying to take him from me like they took you. But he's mine now. God told me so. I'm taking him to the hills, where no devil can touch us. David turned to me, his face tense. He's losing his grip. And if he thinks the world is after him, Clara, this could get worse. Fast. We spent the next week searching the hills. We knocked on every trailer, every remote cabin, every gas station on the backroads. And then, finally, a breakthrough. An elderly farmer recognized the photo of Elijah. I saw them up by Eagle Rock. That man was raving like a mad preacher. Said he was raising a prophet. Kept the baby wrapped tight like he was guarding treasure. My stomach turned. Eagle Rock was dense, mountainous, and nearly unreachable by car. David packed supplies and we hiked through the woods. For 3 days we followed broken branches, old tire marks, bits of torn fabric. And on the 4th day, we saw smoke rising from a clearing. David raised a hand, motioning me to stay low. We crept forward. And then, I saw him, my father, standing outside a crude shack made of scrap wood and tin. His beard was long, face gaunt, eyes wild. He was rocking Elijah in his arms like a preacher at a revival, muttering verses from the Bible, twisting them into madness. And Elijah was barely conscious. My knees buckled at the sight. I wanted to scream, to run, to snatch my child and hold him forever. But David grabbed my arm. If he sees you, he might panic. Let me try. He stepped into the clearing, hands raised. Sir, he called. I'm here to help. I just want to talk. My father froze. His eyes narrowed. Who sent you? No one, David said calmly. But that baby, he needs help. You know that. You're not a bad man. Just scared. Let's figure this out. For a moment I thought he'd lower the baby. Then my father laughed. That high, chilling laugh I knew too well. Help. No one helped me. No one helped her. They all turned their backs. So now I'm the one who gets to decide. This child is mine. And before David could move, my father turned and ran into the shack, slamming the door shut behind him. Broke. I ran forward screaming. Daddy, please. Don't hurt him. He's innocent. No response. Then a crash. Scream. And Elijah crying, weak but alive. David broke down the door. Inside, my father stood in the corner, holding Elijah over a fire pit, shaking. One more step and I'll send him to heaven, he shouted. My heart stopped. David stayed still. It doesn't have to end this way. I'm the only one who ever loved her, my father cried. I raised her. I protected her. She belonged to me. No, I said, stepping forward, voice strong for the first time in my life. You destroyed me. And you will not touch him again. For the first time, my father looked scared. I took another step. Put him down, I said. This ends now. And then, he moved. Fast. Too fast. But David was faster. One tackle. Scream. The fire pit tipped. Elijah fell but into my arms. And my father. He hit his head on the corner of the stone hearth. He didn't get up. I held Elijah close, rocking him, sobbing as his tiny hand touched my face. David checked my father's pulse. He was alive but barely. We called for help. They airlifted my father to the nearest hospital under police custody. And I held my son the entire flight home. But the nightmare wasn't over. Because when I got home, there was a letter waiting on my porch. One I hadn't expected. From my mother. And what it said would shatter everything I thought I knew about my past. If this journey keeps your heart racing and your soul aching, like, comment and subscribe. In the next chapter, the truth behind Clara's childhood will finally be revealed. And it's darker than anyone imagined. The envelope was thin, just a single sheet of paper inside. My mother's handwriting was familiar, but shaky, like her fingers trembled the entire time she wrote. I sat on the edge of the porch with Elijah asleep against my chest, and I unfolded the letter with care. It began simply. Clara, there is something I never told you. And now that everything has happened, you deserve the truth. Even if it hurts. My chest tightened. The man you call your father was not your real father. Froze. The air seemed to still around me. Your biological father was a kind man named Henry Wallace. He was my first love and we were married before you were born. But he died in a car accident just 2 months before you came into the world. I was devastated. Alone. And that's when your stepfather came along. My eyes burned with tears. He was charming in the beginning. He helped me with groceries. Took care of little things around the house. Said he was a man of God. And I believed him. I let him move in. I let him become your father. Too fast. Too soon. My hands shook as I read on. He changed after we married. He became controlling, cruel. And then, the things he started doing to you when you were too young to even understand. Clara, I knew. Always knew. But I was scared. I thought if I left, he'd kill us both. So I tried to protect you in other ways. I failed. I couldn't breathe. Every time I saw him touch you, speak to you with that look in his eye, I felt like I was watching you drown and I had no rope to throw. That's why I turned away. That's why I pretended not to see. But I was wrong. So terribly wrong. I covered my mouth with my hand as tears streamed down my cheeks. You were the best thing in my life, Clara. And I allowed that man to poison you. Sorry. I know you may never forgive me, but please know. He was never your blood. You do not carry his soul. You are not him. Your baby is not him. I clutched Elijah tighter. Your son deserves better. And you deserve peace. If I could take it all back, I would. But all I can give you now is the truth. Please let it set you free. Saying, Mama. I read the letter 3 times. Maybe 4. I wasn't even aware the sun had set until I realized the porch had gone cold. And then, something inside me shifted. He wasn't my father. That monster was never my father. I didn't share his blood. I didn't carry his legacy. And neither did Elijah. For the first time in decades, I felt like I could breathe again. Like the chains wrapped around my soul had begun to crack. I stared at Elijah's tiny sleeping face and I whispered, You're free, baby. We're free. But I knew what had to come next. The court hearings. The public shame. The headlines that would twist everything. I had to prepare for war. And just as I made peace with the truth of my past, my world was shaken again. Because 2 days later, Thomas was released from jail on bond. And he came to see me. He stood on my porch, eyes full of sorrow and longing. I opened the door slowly, holding Elijah close. We didn't speak at first. Then Thomas stepped forward. I never stopped loving you, Clara, he said. Even after everything. Even after the truth. Tears welled in my eyes. I lied to you, I whispered. I dragged you into a storm. He shook his head. You didn't. He did. And then he looked at Elijah. His voice broke. May I hold him? He hesitated, then nodded. And I placed my son into the arms of the man who never had to love him, but chose to anyway. Thomas cradled Elijah as if he were made of glass. He didn't flinch. Didn't ask questions. Just held him like he was something precious. His eyes, Thomas said, smiling faintly. He's got your eyes. I laughed through my tears. But the moment didn't last. Because that same evening the hospital called. My stepfather had regained consciousness. And he was demanding to see me. He said he had one last thing to confess. If Clara's journey has touched you, shaken you, or made you believe in the power of truth, please like, comment, and subscribe. The next chapter will reveal the final secret that could either destroy Clara or finally set her free. I didn't want to go. Every part of my body screamed not to. But something inside me, curiosity, fear, unfinished war, pulled me toward that hospital. Maybe it was the same voice that had once told me to be silent, now telling me to listen just once more. Not for him, but for closure. For me. For Elijah. The hospital lights buzzed above me as I walked down the corridor. My shoes echoed in the sterile silence. I passed rooms filled with coughing men and sleeping women, but all I could think about was the man waiting at the end of that hall. The man who wasn't my father. The man who had ruined my wedding night. The man who had stolen my baby and tried to raise him like a possession. I stood outside room 408, took a deep breath and pushed the door open. He was thinner. Ill. Tubes in his arms, oxygen in his nose. His body was broken, but his eyes, those cruel, piercing eyes, still burned with twisted life. He smiled when he saw me. "My sunshine," he rasped. Flinched. "Don't call me that," I said coldly, stepping inside. "What do you want?" He laughed, dry and bitter. "Even now, you're just like her." "Like who?" asked. He licked his cracked lips. "Your mother." I stiffened. "She loved me once," he muttered. "You think I forced myself into her life?" "Well, she let me in. She wanted a protector. I gave her that." "No," I said firmly. "You broke her. And then you broke me." He leaned forward, eyes wide. "No, you don't understand. That night, your wedding night, it wasn't just about control. It was about blood. About keeping what was mine." "You're not my father," I said, my voice trembling. He smiled again, something sinister, something hollow. "That's what she told you, huh?" I blinked. "It's true." He coughed, his chest rattling. "Oh, it's true, all right. I'm not your blood. But you still belong to me. I raised you. Gave you my name. That makes you mine." "You don't own people," I hissed. "You never did." He didn't reply. Just stared at the ceiling for a long moment. Then he spoke again. "She had another child, you know." Froze. "What?" "Before you," he said. "Before she met me. A girl." "No. That's not possible. Mama never mentioned." "She was taken away," he continued, eyes distant. "Your mother couldn't feed her. She was 17, starving, grieving. Gave the baby up. The state took her." I backed up, mind spinning. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because you think you've figured it all out," he sneered. "But you haven't. That girl, your sister, she came back." "What?" He coughed again, harder this time. "She came to town 3 years ago. You even met her once. She worked at the diner near the church." My knees nearly buckled. "Samantha," he said, chuckling. "That was her name. I knew her. A waitress with warm eyes who always smiled at Elijah when I walked in for tea. I never thought twice about her." "She figured it out," he said weakly. "Tried to talk to your mama. Got turned away. She came to me next. Said she wanted to find you." I was shaking now. "Why didn't you tell me?" He smiled again. "Because I was afraid she'd take you from me." I turned away, covering my face. The weight of it all was too much. Had a sister. A full sister. And she had been right there in town. Looking for me. And he kept her hidden. He chose to bury that truth. Just like he buried every other piece of who I was. When I turned back to him, he was coughing violently, body racked with pain. I didn't move to help. "You've stolen enough from me," I whispered. "I came here for closure. But you gave me more questions." He struggled to sit up. "So, you won't forgive me?" I stared at him. And for the first time, I didn't feel hate. I didn't feel pity either. Felt nothing. I forgive myself, I said. And I walked out. That night I searched every phone book, Facebook group, town hall record I could find. And then, I found her. Samantha Wallace. 39 years old. Living 2 counties over. Single mother. Hair like mine. Just like Mama's. I sent her a letter. Told her everything. A week later she showed up at my door. And the moment we hugged, I felt whole in a way I never had before. She cried holding Elijah. Called him her nephew with so much pride I thought my heart would burst. We sat on the porch, sharing stories, filling in the missing pieces of our lives. But the joy didn't last long. Because the next morning, I got a call from the hospital. He was dead. The man who had haunted me my entire life. And they needed someone to claim the body. If this chapter shook you, moved you, or gave you hope that even broken stories can bloom again, please like, comment, and subscribe. In the final chapter, Clara must face her past once and for all, at a funeral that no one wants to attend, and where one last truth will finally be revealed. The phone rang at 6:42 a.m. sharp. Elijah was asleep on my chest. Samantha had stayed the night in the guest room. The house felt warm, finally full of life again, finally safe. But that call shattered the silence. He passed at 4:13 a.m., the nurse said. We need someone to claim the body, Mrs. Simmons. You're listed as next of kin. I sat there frozen. I wanted to say no. I wanted to hang up. But instead, I whispered, I'll come. Because closure isn't always for them. Sometimes it's for us, the living. Later that afternoon, I stood alone in the hospital morgue. The fluorescent lights buzzed above, and the sheet covering his body was stark white. Too clean for the darkness he'd left behind. The attendant gently pulled the sheet back, revealing a face I'd spent years trying to erase from my mind. He looked smaller now. Hello. Not the towering monster from my childhood, but just a broken man. Bones and skin. There was no power left in his eyes. No voice to control me. No hands to take. Just silence. The nurse handed me a clipboard. Do you want a burial or a state cremation? Pause. And then I said what I had always promised myself I would never say. Cremation. No ceremony. No name. She blinked. No name. He nodded. Let him disappear. Like the soul he tried to destroy. When I left that hospital I didn't look back. I walked out into the sunlight, and for the first time in decades, felt weightless. That weekend I sat on the porch with Samantha and told her everything. My entire truth. About the wedding night. About the pregnancy. About the fear. About the fire it took to raise Elijah while carrying generations of silence. She listened, holding my hand, crying in sync with me. And then she told me her story. She had grown up in foster care, bounced between houses. She'd always known something was missing. A mother's touch. A sister's laugh. A name that meant home. When she was 21, she started searching for answers. It took her 18 years to find me. Now, she didn't want to lose another minute. I know I'm late, she whispered, wiping her tears. But I'm here now. And that was enough. We raised Elijah together from that moment on. He grew into a bright, curious, joyful boy. Never once did I let him wonder where he came from without first telling him who he really came from. A mother who fought. A sister who searched. A father who chose to love without obligation. And not one drop of that man's poison. When Elijah turned 5, we took him to visit the hilltop where Thomas had once carved a cradle with his own hands. Thomas couldn't stay in town after everything. Too many scars. Too many whispers. But we wrote letters. Dozens of them. And he never missed Elijah's birthday. He remarried eventually to a woman who had her own trauma, and they made peace in each other's arms. I never stopped loving him. But I understood now. Love wasn't always about holding on. Sometimes love is about letting someone breathe elsewhere. As for Mama, she passed quietly in her sleep 3 years after everything ended. She left me a small box of things I never knew she kept. My baby teeth, an old ribbon, and a letter. I never had the strength you had, Clara. But I see now that I gave birth to someone far stronger than I could ever be. You broke the curse. You protected the future. I am proud of you. That letter sits in my Bible to this day. Right next to the photo of me, Samantha, and Elijah, standing together in the sunlight. The story you just heard isn't one of tragedy. It's one of truth. Because we don't get to choose the family we're born into. But we do get to choose the legacy we leave behind. And mine is this. I survived. Became a mother, sister, voice, and I built a life out of ashes. So if you've ever been silenced, shamed, or shattered, please know this. You're not broken. You are becoming. And one day your truth will set not just you but others free. If this story stirred your heart, gave you strength, or reminded you that healing is possible, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support helps stories like mine rise from silence and reach the ones who need them most. You are never alone. Your voice matters. Your story matters.